Today is the seventh Sunday after Pentecost. There are two commemoration days Mass. We commemorate St. Elizabeth, whose feast day is today, and also the suffrage of the saints. Preface is a preface of Blessed Trinity. The epistle point for today's Mass is taken from the epistle of St. Paul to the Romans, chapter 6, verses 19 through 23. Brethren, I speak a human thing because of the infirmity of your flesh, for as you have yielded your members to serve uncleanness and iniquity, unto iniquity, so now yield your members to serve justice unto sanctification. For when you were the servants of sin, you were free from justice. What then therefore had you then in those things of which you are now ashamed? For the end of them is death, but now being made free from sin and become servants of God, you have your fruit unto sanctification and life everlasting. For the wage of sin is death, but the grace of God is life everlasting in Christ Jesus our Lord. The Gospel appointed for today's Mass, taken from the Gospel of St. Matthew, chapter 7, verses 15 through 21. At that time, Jesus said to his disciples, beware of false prophets who come to you in the clothing of sheep, but inwardly they are ravening wolves. By their fruits you shall know them. Do men gather grapes of thorns or figs of thistles? Even so, every good tree bringeth forth good fruit, and the evil tree bringeth forth evil fruit. A good tree cannot bring forth evil fruit, neither can an evil tree bring forth good fruit. Every tree that bringeth not forth good fruit shall be cut down and shall be cast into the fire. Wherefore, by their fruits you shall know them. Not every one that saith to me, Lord, Lord, shall enter into the kingdom of heaven, but he that doeth the will of my Father who is in heaven, he shall enter into the kingdom of heaven. Thus far the words of today's Holy Gospel. By their fruits you shall know them. Do men gather grapes of thorns or figs of thistles? Even so, every good tree bringeth forth good fruit. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost. Amen. Sometime I started in general. Actually, I was going to back up a little bit. I was going to actually give a series of sermons, and I think I'll start it probably next Mass. Just almost, if you will, a certain amount of a history, because a lot of people don't even know what happened, let's say, 40 years ago or 50 years ago, where those who are my age and older, they remember all the changes that took place. And I'd like to just go back and give a history. I was going to do that today, but that being said, I was going to start today in that sermon, but I was going to put together like what some people refer to as my pre-sermon. I was going to talk about training children and how children should be quiet during Mass. I mentioned to some different people, and I started getting, word got spread out, I started getting emails coming in, people telling me, families telling me what they do to keep their children quiet during Mass. And so I started just compiling. I got texts and I got emails and whatever, and I started just cut and paste and put them together, and I came up with a couple, 3 pages of notes. But overall, what I sort of came across was there's a certain consistency of certain things that are done in order to train your children to be quiet during Mass. But that being said, it's like the point came home to me about a month ago. Father Newman was out here, and we were talking about something, and he said someone started coming to Mass, to one of his Masses. One of the kids made a little bit of noise. And he says, oh, that's nothing. He says, you ought to listen to Father Skirky's sermons and listen to the children making the noise during the sermons. Something to that effect. And it's like, was it that bad that he would single out the churches here? How bad it is. And I knew there's noise. I mean, I've said before, if a little baby's crying, God probably wants to hear him more than they hear that baby more than hear me because they're innocent and I'm not. But I'm talking about, 1 month, 2-month-old baby type thing. And that being said, a couple of things came up. Someone actually emailed me and said that they were in Minnesota, and the church there was like dead quiet during Mass. And then back in New York, in Round Top, we had the ceremonies with the tent set up outside. There was several hundred people, and I think I could quote, is that there was less kid noise with those several hundred people back at Round Top than there was in the typical Mass that we have in our churches out here. So obviously we got to do something. So what I'm going to do, my sermon today is actually going to be probably 95% just things that mothers and fathers or parents have written me and said, here's what they do to keep their children quiet during Mass. Because they can be kept quiet. I just don't think about it usually because when I'm giving a sermon, it's like I'm concentrating on it. I don't hear them sometimes, but it is disruptive. I got to think of it. Yeah, it does disrupt. If a baby's crying, I'm trying to talk over the baby, no one hears me. So it's disruptive, but also it's uncharitable for those who are sitting in the pews who can't hear the priest either. And so that being said, I'd like to just start out with started reading what was sent me. Kids can be trained, but that is exactly what it is, training. Training starts at home, and it must be consistent, must have consistent expectations and consistent consequences. In other words, when one trains the kids, you have to have a set goal, and it can't be wavered. You can't let it discipline one time and not the next time. You can't just say, don't do this, but then don't have any consequence to it. There has to be a certain amount of training, as you would with anything else. If you, and I'm sure this is not what he wrote me, but if you had a horse or a dog or some animal, you wouldn't let the horse run wild. If you want to be productive, you would put a bit in its mouth and you would train it, and it can be very productive as something very good. Or the dog, you would want to train it so it could be a house dog or a lap dog or whatever it might be. You just don't let him bark and whatever it might be, whenever. And so the same thing we do with our children as well. But going on, it says, kids will not be quiet or obedient at Mass if they're not expected to be quiet or obedient at Mass. Actually, what was said, kids will not be quiet or obedient at Mass if they are not expected to be so at home. I think most of this is a discipline thing. If they don't obey at home, they won't obey anyplace else. The behavior has to start at home with consistency. It's unfair to expect a small child to listen to you in church if you don't make them listen to you at home. That being said, I'd just like to make the explanation is this. And I've seen it where parents will tell their children, no, or do this, or whatever it might be, don't do that, whatever it might be. And it's like the child doesn't hear it. And so the parents say it the second time. And they'll say it the third time. And then at the fourth time, they actually get mad and they put their foot down and the child does it. The child hears them and does whatever's supposed to be done. Stop the noise, stop the running around, whatever it might be. They do it. And so if that's what the standard is, so that same child, let's say, comes to church, so the mother or the father says, please, Johnny, be quiet. That's the first time. And then the kid keeps making noise. It says the second time, and then the third time. And then sometimes I'll hear it says, no, Mommy. I'll hear that. And just to the side, when I hear someone say, no, Mommy, or whatever it might be in church, if they can talk that clear, they shouldn't be talking in church. But if it's the third time or the fourth time, finally the law is laid down, the foot is put down, and then the child does it, that's going to happen in church as well. So what happens to be is that when the command is given, it should be obeyed right then and there. Like one father told me, he says, I have my child there, and whoever it might be, let's say in a construction site or farming or whatever it might be, and he says, move or do this or do that. It has to be done right now. Maybe some machinery is rolling over that direction, or maybe a log is rolling down the hill, maybe a cow's running. It says, move, you got to move. It says, stop, you got to stop. And it has to be right now. It can't be done 3 or 4 times. That is no way. And to train somebody, they have to be told what to do, and they have to realize that when it's told, they're supposed to be doing these things. And so a child learns to sit quietly, and you can start it in this way. So here's all what people said they do for themselves. The child learns to sit quietly during the Rosary every day. During that time, the child has to sit quietly, or I'd kneel. You could look at holy books, and of course kneel with the rest of the family. I really think, and this will be another course, I really think you can spot the kids at Mass whose families do not say the Rosary. Saying the Rosary gives the children time to practice at being quiet, being still, and getting used to the concept of holy things and the practice of them. Kids can lead the Rosary. One mother said that their kid leads the Rosary at 3 years old. They're not perfect, but they know that during prayers, and it extends to Mass, that you can be reasonably quiet. These are just things that parents have found out that they can do to train their children to be quiet. Another response, I guess, said, makes visits to the church during the week. Train the child on behavior, then you can talk to them about what is expected of them during Mass. They need to know that there are consequences for misbehaving or getting taken out during Mass. That being said, another mother says, well, I'm too far away, I can't go Mass. So we spend that time sitting and being quiet and maybe reading a religious story, a story of a saint, and the children are expected to be there, and they know that at these times they have to be quiet. Likewise, that being said, being consequences for misbehaving, they'll be get taken out of Mass. As a child, I don't ever remember being taken out of Mass. But I do remember my father telling me, or my mother, I forget which one, or maybe both, they'd ask me, do I want to go out? They'd ask me that, do I want to go out? And I did not want to go out. So obviously, I would say I knew what happened when I went out, because was taken out, and was spanked, whatever it may have been. Most kids scream because they know that parents will take them out, and take them out, then they got out of Mass, and they can out, if you had a bigger church, in vestibule, or whatever, maybe a crying room, then they could go out, run around, they don't have to go to Mass. So most kids scream because they know parents will take them out, but I have to make sure I discipline them when I take them out so that they don't want to go out. They don't want that. When children cry or starts a tantrum, take them out quickly, swat them in the bottom, wait until the crying stops, and bring them right back in the church. I totally agree. I bring them right back in. Don't let them see it as a means of going out and getting out. As soon as they're done there, bring them right back in. And in that matter, too, then they understand that they're there for a purpose. And I'll be touching this later on. Likewise, and that being said, when I was growing up, our parish church, we had the old parish church, and before we actually left home, my mother would say everybody has to go to the bathroom before we leave. Part of it was we had 25 miles to go to Mass. Secondly was that the church that I grew up and made my first communion in, they didn't have a bathroom inside. They couldn't go downstairs or wherever it might have been. It was an outhouse out back. So we would do that, and then we were expected to sit inside during Mass, not run out for the bathroom during Mass. Yes, there's going to be an emergency, going to be something comes up, but ordinarily, no, you don't do that. Also, when they did build a new church a few years later, in 1964, I made a first communion about 5 years before that. The priest in that parish, I remember my dad was telling me this, that the priest did not want a crying room. He says my dad was telling me that they do not want a crying room for the kids to go back. You go back there and the kids just make noise, they're not disciplined, and would do whatever they do. And he says, no, in fact, he told my dad, he says, you take them out, you swat them, you bring them back in. So that being said, there should be no toys in church. The minute toys are allowed, church becomes a playpen, it becomes playtime. Likewise, that would apply to food as well. You don't have to bring food into the church to keep them quiet. Those who clean a church, I hear someone just told me after Mass in Great Falls, they says that if they'd kept all the food, they would have enough there to have a box of cereal for the next week or two. So you don't feed them cereal, don't feed them Cheerios, whatever they might do. There's other things one can do. First off, instill in them a devotion, once again, at home, at the family rosary. Make them be quiet and hold still. Even if you have to hold them, put them on their knees, give them, one could give them a treat for praying the rosary well. Maybe dessert, maybe read at some point in time a holy story or a book, or let them watch a Catholic movie. Rosary does not necessarily have to be at night, but as one parent said, it should be with both parents there. And absolutely, otherwise they see, well, the attitude is that, well, daddy's not there, or mommy or daddy's not there, why should I do it? If daddy doesn't have to do it, I don't have to do it. And of course, there's where scandal comes in. And recall that scandal is not when someone says, oh, I'm shocked you do that, I'm scandalized. That's not scandal. Scandal is when one of these little children would see me, let's say, do something that's outrageous, something, or a parent do something that's wrong, out of place, sinful, and the child says, well, father is doing this. Let's say using bad language. Or mommy or daddy is doing this, therefore I can do it. That is scandal. That's scandal. And so, as one couple says, it should be that both parents are there, and truly so. Practice the quietness at home with the rosary. A 2-year-old can stay quiet and still, for them, then they get used to it. I'll continue on reading here. Lots of people say kids can't sit still for that long a time, 2 hours. But most kids will sit motionless for a 2-hour movie. That is quite telling. Another says they can watch TV quietly for an hour or so. They can sit quiet during Mass. Move them, and this was several times it came across. Move them to the front of the church so they can see what's going on. What I've heard, too, is that parents, because their kids might be noisy, want to sit in the back of the church. Well, that doesn't hide the noise because I can still hear it up front, and whoever else can hear it up front as well. But being in back, they don't see what's going on. They can't see over the top of all these adults in front of them, and so they aren't concentrating. However, what a lot of parents have said, a number of parents told me that they bring them to the front, they can watch what's going on. You give them a little picture booklet. I'm not talking 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years old. I'm talking, 2, 3 years old, whatever. And they can look at the book, and they can show, and you can show them where the Mass is with the pictures, and pretty soon the little child, 2, 3, old, whatever it is, will see the picture, same as the priest up on the altar, and they get to know the parts of the Mass. Likewise, being up front, one is they seem to be more quiet in that matter. So that being said, practice that quietness at home. Begin early in training them. One parent told me, they said already a little baby, and you mothers can verify it or dispute it, but they said already in 2 weeks they can start knowing things, and within a few weeks after that they start developing their temperament, if you will. And you have to start at that point in time. What Scripture says, spare the rod and spoil the child. And 6 months is not too early. 6 months, I've been told this countless times over. At 6 months, the child's already developing a personality. Already at 6 months, I've been told that they already know what no means. If a child can know what no means at 6 months, they can learn what the word quiet means and be taught to be quiet. And when it comes to teaching a 6-month-old to be quiet, you don't just sit down. So I've heard people say it's meant not to 6 months old, but they say, well, I just talk to my children. Just remember, a 3-year-old, a 4-year-old doesn't necessarily have the use of reason. You can talk to a 3-year-old. You can talk to a 4-year-old and say, do this, do that, one thing, another. But their attention span is like mine. It's really good, but so short. So you have to do it like you would, let's say you're training your dog that does not have the use of reason. You would use other means to discipline them. You don't beat the dog, you don't kick the dog, you don't do things like that, but you do train the dog. And there's a number of ways you can do that. But you discipline them. They already know in a couple months, actually. Once there's a couple months, they already know what no means. So they will, at that age, already begin testing the limits. This is where we're at with children. When you are disciplining them during Mass, take them out, spank them. Once again, I was just cutting and pasting. Take them out, spank them, bring them back to the church. It's not unheard of to take out one or more kids during Mass, and you may feel like you're not getting anything out of Mass, but that's not the point of Mass. Don't be discouraged. Discipline early and often, and very shortly the children can sit during Mass without being disruptive and actually start learning and listening as much as they can acquire at a very young age to do these, to be able to sit in Mass and start praying and learning these things, what's necessary for them as far as of faith. So one thing that has to be done is taught obedience right away. Obedience right away. Remember the 2, 3, or 4 times? That's not necessarily obedient. When you have to tell them the 4th time, that's disobedience up until the 4th one. And then it's like, it goes back to the same principle that we can love God for who He is, or we can love God for the fear of what He's going to do to us if we don't obey the commandments. So if the child can be disobedient the first time the command is given, disobedient the second time, which is sinful, disobedient the 3rd time, and then 4th time is obedient because of the punishment that comes, that's not real obedience as such. That's more fear of a punishment of not doing, not obedience because the command was there. As one parent says, you can even make it a game. Have a small treat, raisin, maybe some candy, whatever. When you tell a child to come, the child comes. If he does, then he gets a treat. If not, he gets a swat. Teach them to obey right away. Once again, right away, all the time, all the way. And if you do the treats, it's not necessarily a bribe, though one mother said it was a bribe. It's more of a reward for doing this. So if attend Mass and they are quiet, one can give them some reward, whatever it might be. And if they aren't, then withhold the reward. And the strategy only works. The strategy only works, I'm told, as written, if you're willing to withhold for poor behavior. Many parents say, well, okay, I'll give it to you because everybody else has it too. I'll give it to you. That defeats the whole purpose. If you're going to reward that way, then you've got to withhold the reward when they are practicing poor behavior. Parenting, and it goes back to both parents being present for, let's say, for the prayers. Parenting and education is the job of both parents. It's not necessarily the job of the grandmother or the uncle or the aunt to have to do this, because if the uncle or the aunt or the grandmother or grandfather steps in, so it gets to be some animosity. Who are you doing to correct my children? It's one thing if the parents aren't there. But the parents being there, they should correct. They should teach. They should do this. For example, last week, or 2 weeks ago, or whatever, we had the parish picnic. There were some kids rollerblading in the vestibule of the church. That's the church. That's like someone back here playing chess in the vestibule of the church here. You don't do those things inside church. Parents should have been disciplining them and stopped them rather than let me come and see it and I stopped them. They should have never even put the rollerblades on. They should have stepped inside that back door, whatever it may be. So remember this, and have a schedule. When you're doing these things, have a schedule. Don't just say, well, okay, we're going to sit quiet, we're going to read some saints, lives of saints for an hour, we're going to say some prayers, we're going to do all these things. We do it this week, and maybe next month we'll do it again. It has to be, you have to have a schedule, and you have to stick to it. It has to be something consistent. Otherwise, it's because consistency goes back to even a habit itself. A habit is a practice of a good virtue. A habit is that which is practiced, not just irregularly, but regularly becomes a habit. If the kids know what to expect, then they will follow. They will be calmer, they will be quiet because it's expected of them. And as another said, in my experience, it makes way more of an impression if dad takes the children out than the mom. Men can usually just pray and block out the noise, so lots of moms are struggling to get the kids to behave, and dad doesn't even know they're acting up. And it goes back to my father. When he would say, do you want to go out? I knew what that meant. Likewise, even at home, we would test our mother. I would anyway. I should say we, my family, my brothers, sisters. I would test my mother, and she would raise her voice. She would raise her stick and try hitting me, whatever. And if I pushed her limit so far, she'd say, I'm telling Dad. At that point, there was no arbitration. I knew when Dad come home that night, out of the field, whatever it might have been, Mom would tell him. I knew there was no backing out. When she said she meant it, she meant it, what she said. She told Dad, and he didn't ask me what my side of the story was. Mom told him what happened, and he spanked me, swatted me, whatever he did. And they were consistent. They were of like mind of what they did. And this has to be the case of parents as well. They have to be of like mind, and they have to work together. The father just can't sit there and let the mother do it all. The father should take them out as well. And it shouldn't be taken all the time. And a few times they can be trained in this matter. When it comes to disciplining as well, and even letting the children cry during Mass, it can be distracting. For the most part, it doesn't distract me. It does sometimes. But certainly it's a charitable thing for your neighbors. If your child is crying and fussing around, making noise, banging toys on the pew, whatever it might be, even the rosary. If you're going to have a rosary, have a soft rosary, whatever. But if they're doing that, if you can't hear me, no one else can either. And if you step out and say, well, if I step out, I won't hear it. Well, then go listen to what Catholics believe and listen to the sermon then. In fact, you should do it anyway, maybe, and let the children at home maybe listen to the sermon. And it's not to be quiet just during the sermon. It should be through the whole Mass as well. And so the noise problem, it can be very disruptive. This is what I feel like I didn't get a thing out of Mass with the kids because of the kids' distractions. I don't mean, once again I'm just quoting here, I don't mean a baby crying or someone bangs their head and fusses for a bit. I mean complete sentences of arguments and fussing. Once again, if they're old enough to talk and to say, Mommy, don't do this, or Mommy, that hurts, or Daddy, that hurts, they're too old for that. That's already, it should have been stopped long. If they can talk that way, they shouldn't be talking in church. And likewise, it's unfair to expect a child to sit an hour and a half, let's say, with nothing to do. Have some books, some holy books, simple prayer books that would have pictures, as I mentioned earlier, where they can look at pictures of the Mass and they could follow the kids can follow along the priest during Mass. And likewise, the parents can sit there and even point them out. If it is that the kids is fussing a little bit, if you stand up, if you walk back and forth a little bit, that doesn't bother me. It doesn't distract me in that matter. But when a kid cries or starts a tantrum, take them out. Swat them on the bottom. Wait till the crying stops, or like my mother would say, or my father would say, "You want to cry? Let me give you something to cry about." But wait until the crying stops, and then bring them right back in the church. Once again, bring them right back in the church. That way, they know what they can do or can't do, and they can't get away with it. They're back in the church. They do it again. They're going to go out and get swatted, and they will learn real fast. And once again, no toys. Don't bring and no food in church. Some things that some have suggested as far as doing it. Likewise, go to church frequently or spend some time at home. Likewise, once again, I mentioned before, it says bring books, not just novels. They're not reading novels. Bring holy books, pictures of saints or lives of saints. Take holy cards, laminate them, have them, set them up in a booklet, whatever it might be, that they can look at. And at home, you yourself read to the children. Mothers, maybe fathers, read to the children. And do that early and do it often. Once again, the consistency. It's like charity. St. Paul would say charity is constant, mutual. It has to be constant, it has to be mutual. It has to be done continually. Teach them to be quiet during this time. Teach them likewise politeness. Remind them that's their duty. And remind them that disobedience can be a sin. It could even be a serious sin, depending on what it would be. But make them stay, going back to what I was saying, make them stay in the church during Mass. Going here downstairs in Great Falls into the vestibule or in the restroom, just to be there till they quiet up, fine, but bring them right back in. Bring them right back in. Don't go down there and start taking your toys out down there. Remember, it's only for an hour, or if I really could go on a sermon, an hour and a half. But once again, as I got two, it says an hour and a half, an hour or more, or 2 hours, they can watch television. They can do this television. They can do this at home. Likewise, another suggestion was start in your turn, or maybe just have them come and clean the church as a family, rather than just maybe the mother's, the father, or the mother just cleaning. Maybe bring the children, let them clean as little as they can do. Let them come understand. Not only is it a privilege to do so, they're cleaning the house of God, but there they have to clean God's house, and there be quiet, and maybe be time where they could even spend a little time saying a Hail Mary, if nothing more. Then I got some. Considered parenting suggestions. There's a little bit over and above and beyond. But it has to do with it as well. One suggestion was put down the cell phones, turn off the TV, get off Facebook. Spend the time with the children, teaching them, reading to them, instructing them, with books and explaining whatever it might be. Your job is to parent your kids. That's what parent your kids, to teach your kids, raise your kids, not to ignore them. All you model for them by doing all these things and putting them aside is that they're not important. This Facebook, this cell phone, this TV, it's more important. And remember, of course, what St. Paul says about when he's a child, do the things of a child. Well, we don't let the children be a child until they're 18 years old and say, okay, now you're of age, let's start acting like an adult. It doesn't work that way. Likewise, many of you drive a car a good distance. Use that time wisely. My own family, we had 25 miles to go, so not just going to church, but we were going to go to town, whatever. We would get in the car, and the first thing we did, we'd pray our rosary. If we were going someplace and we got there and the rosary wasn't finished, we'd stop the rosary at the second, third, fourth decade, whatever it was, and we'd stop. But we'd say the rosary. One could use that time to listen for instruction in the faith, maybe have them memorize that question of the catechism, quiz them in the catechism. Certainly CDs are there with simple explanations or lives of saints, a number of things one can do. That being said, once more, don't, there's something beyond, but still part of it, and I like this, is don't even consider preschool. There's nothing worse than subcontracting. I like that. I like that word. Nothing worse than subcontracting your job to others. Public schools, Protestants, pagans, Public education, just as by the wayside, has been condemned by the church countless times over because they're amoral. Public schools are amoral. Not just in the 60s, the 50s. They were condemned back in the early 1900s, 1800s, because when you remove God out of the school, when there is no reference to God, then what's the standard for morality? If there is no God for morality, then I become my standard, you become your standard, and if you are a naturally good person, then you will be charitable. You won't steal. You won't cheat. You won't lie. You won't rob. But if you're not, if I'm not a naturally good person, then my standard is going to be a lot lower, and it's whatever goes. And hence we see all the school shootings, whatever it might be, because they want to know, how is this taking place? They wring your hands. We've got to stop all these crimes. Well, put God back in there and have a standard. It will be. But public schools don't do that. They're amoral. They're without morals. They remove God, and this is on the moral aspect. Likewise, what's the very source of all knowledge is God himself. You remove God out of the equation, and that which they learn in school is only partial truth. It's only half-truth. It's only by the wayside somewhat of the truth. And so those who go to public schools, the loss of faith is always a real danger. That's, I'd say, approximate occasion of sin. Loss of faith, impurities, all of them around there, all the things they do, the things they teach. I could tell you stories that you'd have to tell your kids, how the kids step out, what they're doing in public schools. Aside from just their pagan beliefs. And I say this, if you don't worship God, you will worship something. If you don't worship God, you'll probably worship the devil or worship mammon. You cannot worship God and mammon both. It'll be one or the other. So if they take out God, they will ultimately be going back, and they will allow Wiccan and one thing and another in these schools. And they do, or Muslim teaching, whatever it might be. They are taught these things as being facts then. So, and what does that do to the Catholic faith? You know it'll do to the Catholic faith. The entire purpose of education is to have the child learn what they must do to save their soul, and if that's eliminated out of the public schools, then that's nothing. They have nothing. You've given them less than nothing. Far better they go and stay home and learn about God and know nothing else. If it's a choice between one or the other, certainly it's not ideal, but if that's the only choice, then certainly do that. But likewise, watch the friends. Get together other good friends and watch your kids. And like I said, like in Great Falls, rollerblading in the vestibule of church. Watch your children. Don't just let them run wild. Let them learn to not throw garbage in the lot or whatever it might be. Just because they're Catholic, we still got to watch them. We can't just let them run wild. And saying all of this, there are what I want to do too, by the way. I could make this available just as is, or I could put in a pamphlet form. Maybe we'll put it out an email and give it to everybody on the list, and we'll have it there. But have it and use it. And there's a lot of other good books as well. For example, The Sins of Parents. I actually have that pamphlet. It's a real good book. And there's Jenny's Gems, Mother's Love prayer book, and also one says Mother Mary Bosco's many excellent CDs on parenting. Use these, start doing it. And once again, if I want to be a priest, I just don't go up and put a vestments on, start off with Mass. I study, I learn. I learn to do my job. You as a parent have to do the same thing. You have to learn your job, knowing what has to be done, and learn how to do it. And you're going to be, a priest spends how many years? A doctor spends how many years? An attorney spends how many years? And whatever profession. If you're a farmer, you just don't go out and start farming. Like one neighbor told the story about how he was 24, 26 years old, and his father retired. Says, "Here's the farm." So he knew nothing about it. He never had to do anything. So he'd run down the neighbors, see what they're going to, their farm, if they're duck footing, he'd go duck foot. If they're swathing, he'd go swath. If they're harvesting, he'd go harvest, until he learned it. Can you imagine parenting that way? And yet people want to get married, and they go in and say, "Okay, we're married and we're going to start parenting," and they know so little. So educate yourself. Educate yourself in this matter. And there are some good things out there that one can use for educating yourself and knowing how to educate your children. And God bless you. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Ghost. Amen.